It was the early hours of March 1st, 2008, in the small, quiet town of Alba, Texas. The kind of place where neighbors knew each other by name, and crime seemed like a distant problem for bigger cities. But on this night, the unimaginable happened. A home, engulfed in flames, lit up the dark countryside. Inside that burning house, a family of 5 was meant to be sleeping peacefully, but by sunrise, 3 of them would be dead. The father, Terry Caffey, crawled from the flames, battered, bloody, and barely alive. With gunshot wounds ripping through his body, he dragged himself through the woods, desperate for help. But what drove him wasn't just the need to survive, it was the horrific truth he carried. He knew who was responsible for the massacre, and it wasn't a stranger. What he didn't know, what he couldn't yet fathom, was that the true mastermind behind the bloodshed was someone he trusted more than anyone else. His own daughter, Erin Caffey, had planned everything. But why would a 16-year-old girl orchestrate the slaughter of her family? What could push a teenager to such a dark and irreversible decision? This is a story of love turned toxic, manipulation that spiraled out of control, and the devastating aftermath of betrayal. Stay with us, because the secrets hidden in the ashes of this tragedy are far more disturbing than they first appear. Life for the Caffey family was built on the foundations of faith, love, and community. Terry and Penny Caffey were the epitome of a small-town church-going couple. Terry, a devout Christian, worked tirelessly to provide for his family while also serving as a youth pastor at the Miracle Faith Baptist Church. His faith was unwavering, and he saw it as his duty to guide not just his family but others in the community toward a righteous path. His wife Penny was his steadfast partner. A homemaker by choice, she poured her heart into raising their 3 children in a home filled with warmth, discipline, and unwavering moral values. Their children reflected the different shades of innocence and promise. Matthew, at just 13 years old, was a budding musician who played the piano with a passion that belied his young age. Tyler, the youngest at 8, was full of energy, curiosity, and laughter, the kind of child who brought joy to everyone he met. And then there was Erin, the oldest at 16. She was intelligent, charismatic, and full of potential, but beneath the surface a storm was brewing. Erin had always been different. Diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, she sometimes struggled to fit into the structured environment her parents created. For years, the family chose to homeschool Erin and her brothers, believing they could provide the guidance and focus she needed better than any school system. The Bible was a central part of their curriculum, and Penny made sure her children understood the importance of faith in their everyday lives. But as Erin grew older, the boundaries of their sheltered life began to chafe against her growing desire for independence. 6 weeks before the tragic events, the Caffeys decided to re-enroll Erin and her brothers in public school. They believed it was time for Erin to spread her wings and experience life beyond the close-knit walls of their home. It was a decision they hoped would help her grow, but it unknowingly set her on a collision course with disaster. It was at Rains High School where Erin first crossed paths with Charlie Wilkinson. She met him during her part-time job at the local Sonic Drive-In, a popular hangout spot for teenagers in the area. Charlie was 18, handsome in a rugged way, and exuded a rebellious charm that immediately caught Erin's attention. From the moment Erin Caffey met Charlie Wilkinson, her life took a sharp turn, one that would lead to unimaginable consequences. What began as a whirlwind teenage romance quickly spiraled into something far more intense and ultimately deadly. For Erin, Charlie was a symbol of freedom, a way to escape the structure of her family's strict and faith-driven home. For Charlie, Erin represented validation and control, feeding into his need to feel powerful and wanted. Together, they created a toxic bond fueled by defiance, obsession, and rebellion. Charlie Wilkinson wasn't just a typical high school senior. At 18 years old, he lived with his father and stepmother in modest circumstances. His rough edges and rebellious personality made him stand out in a town like Alba, Texas. To Erin, he was everything her parents had warned her against, and that only made him more appealing. Charlie showered Erin with attention, making her feel as though she was the most important person in his world. He told her he wanted to marry her and gave her his grandmother's engagement ring as a symbol of his commitment. This wasn't just a teenage fling in Erin's mind, it was her future. But Charlie's devotion came with a darker side. He was possessive, controlling, and unyielding in his expectations of Erin. He would text her constantly, demand her time, and insist that they belonged together, no matter what anyone said. To Erin, this intensity felt like love, an all-encompassing kind of love she believed she'd never find again. But to those who knew Charlie, his behavior was unsettling. He had a temper, and when things didn't go his way, he wasn't afraid to lash out. Penny and Terry quickly became concerned about Charlie's influence on their daughter. Penny, in particular, felt uneasy when she noticed Erin wearing a ring at church, a ring Charlie had given her as a symbol of his commitment. It was his grandmother's engagement ring, and Erin wore it with pride, flaunting it as if they were already planning a future together. Penny demanded that she return it immediately, a gesture that symbolized her disapproval of their budding relationship. The more the Caffeys learned about Charlie, the more uneasy they became. Penny took it upon herself to dig deeper and discovered Charlie's MySpace page. What she found was deeply troubling. Posts filled with profanity, sexual innuendos, and a glimpse into a life that was entirely at odds with the values they had instilled in their daughter. This wasn't just a boy with a rebellious streak. To Penny and Terry, Charlie was a threat to everything they had worked so hard to build. Their decision was firm. Erin was forbidden from seeing Charlie again. They hoped the separation would put an end to the relationship and help Erin refocus on her faith and her family. But what they didn't realize was that their attempt to protect their daughter would only deepen the rift between them. For Erin, her parents' actions weren't a gesture of love and concern, they were an unforgivable act of control. To her, they weren't just trying to separate her from Charlie, they were trying to destroy her happiness. The rejection only fueled her defiance, and in Charlie's arms, she found both comfort and a shared anger. Together, they began to envision a life without boundaries, a life without her parents standing in their way. The seeds of rebellion had been sown, and as Erin and Charlie's relationship intensified, so too did their disdain for the Caffeys. What started as teenage infatuation would soon spiral into something far more dangerous, as their desire for freedom turned into a deadly obsession. The promise ring, the MySpace page, and the growing defiance were all pieces of a puzzle that no one could yet see coming. But soon, the world would learn just how far Erin Caffey was willing to go to keep her love alive. When Penny and Terry Caffey stepped in and forbade Erin from seeing Charlie, they thought they were protecting their daughter. But the couple had underestimated the lengths to which Erin and Charlie would go to stay together. Their relationship, already intense, became even more secretive. They began meeting in hidden locations, exchanging text messages late into the night, and planning their future together. Each act of defiance only strengthened their bond and solidified their belief that they were destined to be together, no matter the cost. In these secret moments, Erin began opening up to Charlie about her frustrations with her family. She complained about her parents' rules, their religious expectations, and their refusal to let her make her own choices. Over time, these venting sessions took a darker turn. Erin began painting her parents not as caring, but as controlling, not as protective, but as obstacles standing in the way of her happiness. To Charlie, her words weren't just complaints, they were a call to action. The couple started discussing ways to remove the barrier standing between them, her family. At first, the idea was abstract, teenage fantasies of running away together and starting a life of their own. But the more they talked, the more their fantasies began to take shape. The idea of leaving quietly morphed into something more sinister. Erin started suggesting that her parents weren't just a problem, they were the problem. And the only way to solve that problem, she believed, was to eliminate them entirely. For Charlie, Erin's suggestion was a chance to prove his loyalty and commitment. If she wanted her parents gone, he was willing to do whatever it took to make her happy. But the couple knew they couldn't do it alone. That's when they turned to Charlie's friend, Charles Wade. Charles Wade, 20 years old, was no stranger to trouble. He had a history of bending the rules and had an appetite for thrill-seeking. When Charlie approached him about the plan, Charles didn't hesitate. To him, this was an opportunity to make some quick money, as Charlie had promised him a cut of whatever valuables they could take from the cafe home. It was a deal sealed by greed and a complete lack of regard for human life. But even with Charles Wade on board, they needed someone to assist with logistics. That's where Bobby Johnson came in. Bobby, Charles's 18-year-old girlfriend, had no real connection to Aaron or Charlie, but was deeply loyal to Charles. If he was involved, she would follow. Her role would be simple: to act as the getaway driver, waiting outside while the others carried out the plan. In the weeks leading up to the night of the murders, the group began solidifying their plan. They would wait until the early hours of the morning, under the cover of darkness. Charlie and Charles would enter the cafe home armed and ready, while Bobby would keep the engine running, ready to whisk them away. Erin would stay behind at a friend's house, maintaining an alibi to distance herself from the events about to unfold. Each step of the plan was discussed and rehearsed, their confidence growing with every passing day. They believed they were untouchable, that their plan was foolproof. What they didn't anticipate was the chaos, horror, and devastation that would follow. What drove a 16-year-old girl to conspire against her own family? Was it the pull of love, the lure of rebellion, or something far darker? Whatever the reason, the wheels were now in motion, and there was no turning back. It was the early morning hours of March 1st, 2008. The Caffey family's modest home sat in silence, surrounded by the darkness of the Texas countryside. Inside, the family slept soundly, unaware of the horror that was about to unfold. For Terry and Penny Caffey, it was just another quiet night. But for their daughter, Erin, it was the culmination of weeks of planning, a night that would forever shatter their family. At around 3 a.m., Terry and Penny were jolted awake by a loud crash as their bedroom door slammed open, hitting the nearby dryer in the adjacent laundry room. Before either of them could react, gunshots rang out. The first bullets tore through Penny as she lay in bed. Terry, now wide awake and in shock, tried to sit up, but before he could move, he was struck multiple times. Blood poured from his wounds as he struggled to process what was happening. As the chaos erupted in their bedroom, Terry instinctively thought of his children. He ignored the searing pain from his injuries and scrambled to get to them. Stumbling into the hallway, he heard the panicked voice of his 13-year-old son, Matthew. "Charlie! Charlie, why are you doing this?" "No, Charlie, please, why are you doing this?" Matthew's cries were cut short by another round of gunfire. The attackers, Charlie Wilkinson and Charles Wade, moved methodically through the house, ensuring that no one was left alive. Tyler, just 8 years old, had tried to hide. He was found in his bedroom cowering in fear, but Charlie and Charles showed no mercy. Armed with a samurai sword taken from the Caffey's home, they stabbed Tyler repeatedly until he succumbed to his injuries. The sheer brutality of the attack left no doubt about their intentions. This wasn't just murder, it was a massacre. Back in the master bedroom, Terry managed to return, hoping to save Penny. But when he reached her, he was met with an even more horrifying sight. The same sword used on Tyler had been turned on Penny, leaving her nearly decapitated. Terry collapsed beside her, his body weakening from the gunshot wounds. For a moment, it seemed as though this was the end. But as smoke began to fill the house, another thought overtook him. He had to survive. He had to escape, not just for himself, but to bring justice for his family. The attackers, believing they had finished the job, set the house on fire. Flames quickly consumed the wooden structure, turning it into an inferno. Terry, bleeding profusely and struggling to breathe, knew he didn't have much time. The smoke was thick, choking him as he crawled toward the door. Every inch felt like a mile, his body screaming in pain with every movement. But adrenaline and sheer determination pushed him forward. Once outside, the cold night air hit his face, and he knew he had one final battle to fight. The Caffey's home was in a remote area, surrounded by woods, with their closest neighbor over 400 yards away. Terry, still bleeding from 5 gunshot wounds, began the grueling journey through the dark, dense forest. Each step was agony, his vision blurred and his body weak, but he pressed on. He had to tell someone what had happened. He had to name the person responsible. After what felt like an eternity, Terry reached the home of his neighbors, Tommy and Helen Gaston. He banged on their door, his voice barely audible as he called out for help. When the door opened, Tommy was met with a sight he would never forget. Terry, covered in blood and smoke, clinging to life. "They killed my family," he gasped. "Charlie Wilkinson. Charlie Wilkinson." The attackers fled the scene. Outside the burning house, Aaron sat in a car with Bobby Johnson, who had been waiting to drive the group away. Aaron showed no emotion as the glow of the fire lit up the night sky. To her, this was a necessary step to achieving her freedom. Inside the car, Charlie and Charles climbed in, adrenaline pumping, and the group sped away into the darkness. For them, it was a victory. They had executed their plan, silenced the Caffey family, and escaped without being caught, or so they thought. Laughing and boasting, they celebrated their perceived success, oblivious to the fact that Terry was still alive. The secret they thought they had buried in the flames was already beginning to unravel, and the next chapter of their story, the one they hadn't planned for, was just beginning. When emergency responders arrived at the scene of the Caffey family home, they were greeted by a sight no one could have prepared for. The house was engulfed in flames, reducing what had been a family sanctuary to a smoldering ruin. As firefighters worked to extinguish the blaze, paramedics tended to Terry Caffey, who had miraculously escaped. Despite being shot 5 times, covered in blood, and barely clinging to life, Terry had one thing on his mind: identifying the person responsible. Through labored breaths, he managed to say the name that would set the investigation in motion: Charlie Wilkinson. As the fire was brought under control, investigators began their grim task. Inside the wreckage, they discovered the remains of Penny, Matthew, and Tyler. Penny's body bore the horrifying evidence of her brutal death, with injuries so severe that investigators described them as nearly decapitating her. Matthew's body was found near his bedroom, and Tyler's small frame lay where he had been mercilessly stabbed. The charred remnants of the home stood as a testament to the unimaginable violence that had occurred. Detectives immediately turned their attention to Charlie Wilkinson, the name Terry had provided. Charlie wasn't difficult to find. He and his accomplices, Charles Wade and Bobby Johnson, had fled to Charles's mobile home, just a few miles away from the scene of the crime. Police quickly tracked them down, arriving at the property with backup to ensure they could apprehend the suspects without incident. Inside the trailer, officers found the group lounging as though nothing had happened. There were no signs of panic, no attempts to cover their tracks. But it wasn't just Charlie, Charles, and Bobby who were taken into custody that day. Aaron Caffey, the sole surviving member of the Caffey children, was found with them. To the investigators, her presence raised immediate questions. At first, Aaron claimed to be a victim, insisting she had been kidnapped by Charlie and forced to come along against her will. But something about her story didn't add up. Her demeanor was calm, almost unnervingly so, and her words lacked the panic or fear one might expect from someone who had just witnessed the massacre of their family. Detectives began to probe deeper, piecing together the timeline of events. As they interrogated Charlie, Charles, and Bobby, a far more sinister picture began to emerge. Aaron's story unraveled quickly under scrutiny. She had no injuries, no signs of being restrained or forced. In fact, the evidence suggested she had not been a bystander at all, but rather an active participant in planning the attack. Text messages between Aaron and Charlie painted a damning picture. Over weeks, the couple had exchanged messages discussing their desire to be together and the obstacles standing in their way. Her family. The messages showed a chilling progression, starting with fantasies of running away and escalating to detailed plans for murder. Aaron's frustration with her parents was evident, and Charlie's promises to fix everything added fuel to her anger. They had talked about the best time to strike, what weapons to use, and even how to make it look like an accident. It wasn't just the digital evidence that implicated Aaron. Both Charles Wade and Bobby Johnson, during their interrogations, pointed to Aaron as the mastermind. They described how she had spoken openly about her hatred for her parents and her belief that their deaths were the only way she and Charlie could be together. Bobby, in particular, described Aaron as composed and detached during the planning process, a stark contrast to the chaos of the night itself. When officers confronted Aaron with the evidence, her initial claims of being a victim fell apart. Instead of breaking down or showing remorse, Aaron maintained a calm and almost emotionless demeanor. It was this lack of reaction that left even seasoned investigators shaken. How could a 16-year-old girl, they wondered, orchestrate something so heinous and sit there as though it were just another day? The arrest shocked the small community of Alba, Texas. News of the crime spread quickly, and with it came disbelief. How could a teenager raised in a devout, loving household turn against her family so violently? And how could she do it with such chilling indifference? By the end of the day, Aaron Caffey, Charlie Wilkinson, Charles Wade, and Bobby Johnson were all in custody, charged with 3 counts of capital murder. But for the investigators, the case was far from over. There were still questions to be answered, motives to uncover, and a community to confront with the unimaginable truth: that the person behind this unthinkable crime was not an outsider, but a daughter from within. The courtroom was packed as the trials unfolded, with community members eager for answers and justice. What had driven a teenage girl to orchestrate the brutal slaughter of her own family? The legal proceedings sought to uncover the truth, and the details revealed were as disturbing as the crime itself. From the outset, Aaron's case was controversial. Despite being only 16 years old at the time of the murders, the court determined she would be tried as an adult. Prosecutors argued that the severity of her actions and the evidence of her calculated involvement left no other option. She wasn't portrayed as a misguided teenager, but as the driving force behind the plot. Aaron's text messages, conversations with Charlie Wilkinson, and the testimonies of Charles Wade and Bobby Johnson all painted a chilling picture. Aaron had masterminded every detail, from the timing of the attack to her calculated decision to stay away from the crime scene to establish an alibi. In the courtroom, the prosecution presented its case with methodical precision. They highlighted Aaron's frustration with her parents and her growing defiance against their rules. Witnesses recounted how Aaron had openly vented her anger, calling her parents obstacles to her happiness. Prosecutors described her manipulation of Charlie Wilkinson, convincing him that the only way they could be together was to eliminate her family. Her role as the instigator was undeniable, and her calm demeanor during the trial only added to the eerie nature of her involvement. Charlie Wilkinson, too, faced the full weight of the law. As Aaron's boyfriend and the one who physically carried out much of the violence, he was portrayed as her willing accomplice. The prosecution argued that Charlie's obsession with Aaron and his desire to prove his loyalty led him down a dark path. Testimonies and evidence revealed how he had recruited his friend, Charles Wade, promising him a share of the Caffey's valuables in exchange for his help. Wade's role was equally pivotal, with prosecutors emphasizing his active participation in the murders and the decision to set the house on fire. Bobby Johnson, while not directly involved in the killings, was far from an innocent bystander. Her role as the getaway driver and her knowledge of the plan made her an accomplice. The prosecution argued that she had opportunities to stop the crime or alert authorities, but chose instead to support Charles Wade's involvement. When it came time for sentencing, the outcomes reflected the severity of each defendant's role. Aaron Caffey, the mastermind, received 2 life sentences. However, because of her age at the time of the crime, she was granted the possibility of parole, eligible at age 59. The decision was polarizing. Some believed she deserved harsher punishment, while others saw her as a manipulated teenager who had made a horrific mistake. Charlie Wilkinson and Charles Wade were both sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Their actions on the night of the murders, from the brutal killings to the setting of the fire, left no room for leniency. They would spend the rest of their lives behind bars, a consequence of the unspeakable violence they had inflicted on the Caffey family. Bobby Johnson, whose involvement was deemed less direct, was sentenced to 40 years in prison. She would be eligible for parole after serving 20 years. The sentence acknowledged her role as an accomplice while recognizing that she had not actively participated in the murders. For the small town of Alba, justice had been served, but the scars of the crime would linger for years to come. The trials laid bare the depths of betrayal and violence that had torn apart the Caffey family. But even as the legal proceedings came to an end, questions remained. Could Aaron's actions ever be fully understood? And could the surviving father, Terry Caffey, ever truly find peace? Terry Caffey survived that harrowing night, but the pain of what he endured left scars far deeper than the physical ones. In the weeks following the murders, he struggled to comprehend the enormity of his loss. His wife, Penny, and his 2 young sons, Matthew and Tyler, were gone. The weight of knowing his daughter Erin had orchestrated the atrocity was unbearable. Consumed by grief and anger, Terry fell into a deep depression, questioning his faith and his will to live. There were moments when the thought of ending his own life seemed like the only way out. But in his darkest hours, Terry turned to the one thing that had always been a constant in his life: his faith. He clung to it as a lifeline, searching for answers and the strength to move forward. It wasn't an easy road, but over time, Terry found clarity and purpose in forgiveness. The decision to forgive Erin was not one he came to lightly. At first, the idea seemed impossible. How could he forgive the person who had taken away everything he held dear? But as he prayed and reflected, he began to see forgiveness not as a way to absolve Erin, but as a way to free himself from the crushing burden of hate and resentment. Terry realized that holding on to anger would only destroy him further. And so he chose forgiveness, not because Erin deserved it, but because he needed it to heal. Terry's faith became the cornerstone of his recovery. With time, he rebuilt his life, finding a way to honor the memories of his wife and sons while moving forward. He remarried and started a new family, finding love and joy again despite the tragedy that had shattered his world. But Terry didn't stop there. He made it his mission to share his story, speaking at schools and churches across the country. His message was one of hope, redemption, and the power of faith in overcoming even the most unimaginable circumstances. As for Erin, her life took a drastically different path. Now in prison, she spends her days reflecting on the decisions that led her there. She has expressed remorse for her actions, acknowledging the pain she caused and the lives she destroyed. But remorse, however sincere, cannot undo the past. Erin remains behind bars, with the possibility of parole when she turns 59. The Caffey case serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked teenage rebellion and toxic relationships. Erin's infatuation with Charlie Wilkinson clouded her judgment, leading her down a path of destruction that she can never escape. For parents, it's a cautionary tale about the importance of communication and understanding, and for teenagers, a sobering example of how impulsive decisions can have lifelong consequences. But above all, Terry Caffey's story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. His ability to forgive, rebuild, and find purpose after such a devastating loss is a powerful example of the strength that faith and hope can provide. In the ashes of unimaginable tragedy, Terry found a way to heal, and through his story, he inspires others to do the same. The story of the Caffey family is one of unimaginable tragedy, but it is also a story of resilience, faith, and the enduring complexities of human relationships. The crime itself leaves an undeniable mark, a haunting reminder of how love, when twisted into obsession, can lead to devastating consequences. Erin Caffey's actions, born out of rebellion and toxic attachment, shattered her family and left her community searching for answers. Her remorse, though genuine, cannot undo the lives lost or heal the wounds left behind. For Terry Caffey, the journey from grief to forgiveness was nothing short of extraordinary. His choice to forgive Erin, not as a justification of her actions, but as a means to reclaim his own life, offers a profound lesson in humanity. It is a testament to the strength of faith and the power of forgiveness, even when forgiveness feels impossible. This case forces us to confront difficult questions. What drives someone to commit such a heinous act against those they love? Can forgiveness truly bring peace, or does it only mask an unhealed wound? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, can a bond as sacred as that between a parent and child ever recover from such betrayal? As we reflect on this story, one thing is clear: there are no easy answers. The scars of that night will remain, etched into the lives of everyone involved. But from those ashes, a father found the strength to rise, to rebuild, and to inspire others with his story. In the ashes of unimaginable loss, a father found the strength to forgive. But the question remains, can such a betrayal ever truly be reconciled? That's for you to decide.